Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and as I have done previously, every now and then I want to grab a couple of books and talk a little bit. Sometimes it's kind of fun to take a look at things. And so what I did, I grabbed a couple of books, not in any set order, and not of any set age. And they're kind of a little bit all over the map here. But I thought I'd share a few of these. With all the talk going on now about how history is repeating itself, 1968, 1933, we have all of that stuff being said. Here's a book that's quite fascinating. It's called Thunder Over Europe. Now, what is this book? Well, it was a book that was written and by E. Alexander Powell, and he spent a lot of time in Europe, and he discovered some troubling things. And the big troubling thing seemed to be this, what he called this Mussolini's little brother, Adolf Hitler. That's the person that he thought was the most problematic in what he saw. Here's a picture in this book. Now, what's really interesting about this book is what year is it? Let's take a look. 1931. And he was selling this thing, warning everybody, all hell's going to break loose in Europe very soon. But like most prophets, people didn't really listen. And of course, the United States was woefully unprepared. Much of Europe was quite unprepared as well. And he was talking about it. Another book that comes to mind here, I pulled off, which is kind of fascinating in its own right. And it came out, I believe, in the 1870s or 1880s. Yeah, 1885. And it's called Korea, the Hermit Nation. Now, the interesting thing about this, of course, they spell Korea with a C. Corea. And this is quite fascinating looking at the country of Korea as it was seen in the 1880s. Really quite fascinating to read and look at. And I've gone through various parts of this whole thing. And it's really an interesting window into Korea. And there's a whole big monstrous map in the back of this book, which I should take a photograph and share another time, because it's really cool. But this is a great book. Not an easy book to find. I mean, in the early editions, but it's a great, great book. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting when it comes to politics, we have political parties, and we don't really have new political parties pretty much these days. We just have retreads, you might say. We take something and then we just kind of throw something around it and say, look, it's all brand new, and it's about as old as the Model T Ford. But the thing is that campaigns are fascinating things. And as technology improved in the sense of making books in a quick way, lots of campaigns were based on books, and there would be books all about the candidates. This one's interesting. This is the first Republican candidate for president, and that was Colonel John Fremont. And this is a book all about him. And of course, what year did it come out? 1856, the year of the first election that you had a Republican versus a Democrat. And of course, the Democrat won, whose name was James Buchanan. And we can spend a lot of time talking about him sometime, because there's some fascinating things about him. And in many respects, he was ill-suited for the issue at hand. And, well, you know, there's a bad way to do it and there's a worse way to do it. He found the worst way to do everything. And instead of helping anyone, he just offended everyone. But he did beat Fremont. And perhaps, you know, this could be the great question historically, too, is what if Fremont had won? What would the situation in the Union be? A Republican had become president. And, of course, the Republican Party had stated already its opposition to the expansion of slavery. So what would happen? Who knows? It would probably be a fascinating story, perhaps one we wouldn't want to see, because the war that took place in 1861 was frightful and horrible, and 700,000 plus individuals lost their lives. Think about that. When the population was as small as it was, we lost close to like 700,000 soldiers. Pretty amazing. Well, nonetheless, this was a very early campaign book, and there was lots to follow. Let's see what else do we have here. What do we have? Oh, well, you know something with books, and one of the fascinating things about books, once again, like with campaigns and whatever, when disasters took place, you had the ambulance chasers. And in those days, it wasn't a lawyer, they were authors. And they would be right behind the people in the disaster and asking questions. And if they couldn't get answers to their questions, they made up everything. These were these books that came out over, about a 70, 80-year period. The disaster of, and of course the high point of it all is when the Titanic sank. There were so many memorial books and everybody was making a killing on the whole thing. It was really amazing. But what's this one? Well, this is the Great Chicago Fire. And of course, it's all about the fire. Came out in 1871, not long after the fire. And it tells all kinds of stories. How many are true? Give or take, But the thing is that it does give an account of what happened in simple forms, simple words. And the thing is that it's really kind of a fascinating thing. I can't really give you any kind of estimate of how accurate it is. And I have not read through the whole thing, I must say. But nonetheless, there were a lot of them as well. And I'm thinking, events, made really fascinating books. And times made fascinating books. And something? We had an election in 1876 for the president. And it was a disaster. Everything that could go wrong did. There was so much corruption on both sides. It was amazing. And it finally turned out to be nearly a tie. Some question that, of course. And they had to have a gathering of various individuals to come up with a vote. Now, the interesting part of this whole thing was that the individuals they chose for this duty, there was one more Republican than there was a Democrat. So after they did their entire investigation, the vote was entirely along party lines. And being that there was one more Republican, Rutherford B. Hayes became president basically by one vote. That's about it. And that's pretty amazing. And of course, everybody said, fraud. There is something that really stinks here. And everybody kind of realized that the entire political scene had become so corrupt. But 1876 makes the Grant administration look proper. Okay. It was awful. And after that debacle, a book was written. And it was entitled A Political Crime. And what is it about? It's all about 1876 and what was done and who did what and how could they do what they did. And it's rather fascinating to read, and it's, once again, a fascinating book to have in your library. And once again, everybody has different tastes and likes. In my library, there's a lot of early books. There's a lot of books from the 19th century dealing with all different types of events, which is kind of fascinating as well. Let's see what we have next here, as I dig a little bit here. During the Spanish-American War, which I haven't really gotten into yet and talked about, but there's a lot to talk about. We had our little war in Cuba, which John Hay said was a splendid little war. Well, there's no such thing as a splendid war, but it was quick, indeed. And the careers of several individuals were created, including Theodore Roosevelt's. They even changed where he charged. He charged up Kettle Hill. They changed it to San Juan Hill. Sounded better. At least that's what Hearst said. But nonetheless, in that conflict, we came to Manila. We had the Battle of Manila. We had the Philippines. And Admiral Dewey, who was never known for extreme brilliance, told the members of the local government in the Philippines that we have done all of this to give you your freedom. And Dewey said, my word is as good as law. That's pretty strong words, when you think about it. And he was in a ship called the Olympia sitting there. And then he went back. The United States came over and said, no, you're not getting your freedom. We're taking you over. And of course, that started the Filipino-American War, which went on till 1902, which is never talked about, by the way. And the other thing is that officially it ends in 1902, but is that when it totally ended? No. It continued being a guerrilla war for nearly another decade. And then, of course, after World War II, they got their freedom, but it just took a little longer than Dewey anticipated, which is something it's a terrible story what happened in the Philippines, and I will get into it. But look at this book. It's called not Freeing, not Helping, it's Taking Manila. Perfect book to have in the library, too, of course. Now I'm down to the last two. Actually three, excuse me. Didn't see the little one. Let's do the little one. This is a wonderful first edition, actually. And it's from a long time ago. And it's Randolph Calico and the Hey Diddle Diddle picture book. And this wonderful book is inscribed not by him, but to someone. And it says here, to my little friend Maud Revington, it looks like. And it's Dover Court, October 1878. At least we have a date on this, which helps us understanding that this is a pretty early edition. And I found this a long time ago. I had this in the library a long, long time. And it's kind of a cool thing, and it's fun to look through because it's all the pictures in here. Just to give you a little bit, because I don't want to dig through the whole thing, but they're hand colored portraits here. Hi diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle. The cow jumped over the moon, and the dish ran away from the spoon. This is the dish and the spoon running away, actually. And it's, hand colored and stuff. There lots of these in here. It's really quite nice. Wonderful book. Now, whoops. Oh, they're going back on the shelf in a moment. Here's a really interesting and quite heavy book. It's called The Museum of Antiquity. And it was one of those kind of books that you could buy. There would be like a subscription, and you could get, this book. And a book like this, quite heavy, quite full, lots of information, and it's all about antiquity. And it goes through, like here, it says the table of contents, Pompeii, and amusements. They have various things with the Egyptians, with the Romans, the Greeks, and a lot more, I'm sure. And it's massive. I mean, we're talking, 900 pages? More than 900 pages of just fascinating information and pictures that would keep the Victorian child busy for a long, long time. This is probably around 1870, 1880, somewhere right around there. Let me see how close I am. $18.80. Okay. Now the last book here. This is also something that's kind of interesting, and my camera is starting to sag down here, I notice. Hello. I'm sitting there starting to do a limbo contest here. This last book. In 1876, we had our centennial. And the centennial would take place, of course, in Philadelphia. And it became basically a sort of a World's Fair of sorts. Now, we had earlier ones. We had in New York City, we had our very short-lived Crystal Palace to copy the British one, and it was there for about 2 years and burned down. But in 1876, there was a massive fair built on the grounds near Independence Hall, and it was all to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the United States. And so, of course, something brand new was born at the World's Fair of 1876. Souvenir books. This is a lot of souvenirs. And this was filled with, pullouts. So you can see, various things from the fair. Wonderful, wonderful stuff in here. This is fascinating to go through. And of course, I dig through this thing a lot. And sometimes if I have a question on an event or something that took place, I sit there and start digging through this book. I'm ready to do so now. I'm just looking at it, and it's very tempting. It's so fascinating because, we know all about the 1893 World's Fair like the back of our hand. And there were so many books and so many various things that were shared. I have a lot of them, actually, which we will do a little 1893 too in time. But this is from the World's Fair, 1876, in the Centennial Celebration. And it's the whole history of it. And, of course, it goes to the whole history of the United States. A lot of incorrect information, but nonetheless quite fascinating and entertaining. And one has to remember also, in 1876, Independence Hall didn't quite look like it does today. The two wings, which had been torn down in 1812, were replaced by these low buildings. And then in the 1890s, they built replicas again on the side of Independence Hall. A lot of times people think that those buildings are original. They're not. But they're really neat because they kind of brought it back to perspective. And you know, there's interesting pictures of it in this book, and lots of information about the Liberty Bell, which was really becoming something special. And also the fact of Betsy Ross. Nobody knew anything about Betsy Ross. I mean, they knew who she was. But her grandson, in the early 1870s, decided to raise himself up in Philadelphia society. And so all of a sudden he announced that his grandmother had told him that she made the first flag. And it was all done in 1775. Well, of course, that's all incorrect. The flag didn't come out until 1777, and it was designed by Francis Hopkinson, who was in Congress. We had a flag committee. That's what they do usually. And of course, they say that she did it. Well, I'm sorry. There's no evidence whatsoever that Betsy Ross made the first flag, but it's a cute story, you know, and that's the whole thing about history at times. As I told you, a lot of times stories are made up to inspire, and Betsy Ross inspires people. And I think that Betsy Ross was involved in making pennants for ships, and maybe she did, later in her years, she did some flags. Who knows? But the whole thing is, her grandson had a heck of a good time in Philadelphia because he was advanced to the A1 family in Philadelphia because all of a sudden, Betsy Ross is the rock star in, revolutionary circles, at least in the 1876 centennial celebration. So, some fun books, some fun conversation. I think it's a wonderful thing to just sit around and look at a book or look at a bunch of books. I take lots of books out and read a chapter here, and I go to another book and I read something there. Just something to keep my mind busy and active. And that's the whole idea behind the library. It's great information. And in this age of the internet, and people are sitting there saying things are being banned and changed, a book written in 1850 ain't changing. It's going to stay the same as it was in 1850, which is wonderful. Because that's what history's all about. You don't want to erase history. You want to know about it, understand it, appreciate it, and despise it if need be. But the fact is, you don't want to forget it because then you open yourself up for making the same stupid mistake in the future. That's what history is all about. And that's what I love to talk about. And I guess that's enough. I babbled at you for a while, and it was fun just pulling out some random books here and just talking about them. And I'll do this some more. We got lots of books to look at. Okay, take care.